Seriously, Cody.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're particularly delighted to have you all here tonight, both in person and virtually, for the Winnipeg launch of An Ordinary Violence, published by Spiderline and House of Anansi, and of course, the debut horror novel from Adriana Chartrand. This is one of those events where I feel very selfish to actually be paid to be here. I love horror novels, and we rarely launch them here in the city. But it's reductive to describe this book as simply a horror novel. It's one of those books that performs such a deft act of juggling family drama, cosmic horror, and humor somehow, and does it so incredibly well. It seems completely shocking that this is Adriana's debut horror novel. It's a wonderful book. It's also hallucinogenically claustrophobic in certain parts, to the point where I felt completely chilled even reading this in the middle of the summer. So I'm very excited to hear more about this, which is of course a horror novel about a young Indigenous woman haunted by the oppressive legacies of colonization. Now, just to give you a sense of what will be happening this evening, we'll have a reading from Adriana up here from the podium, and then we'll move along to a conversation at the chairs to my left. Following the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. If you are physically here in the space, all we ask is that you raise your hand and I will run over to you with this microphone, which is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that those watching at home can hear your question. And if you are one of those people watching on YouTube, please feel free to write any questions you might have into the chat and we can put them to Adriana as time permits. If you have any positive comments or anything similar, please feel free to write those in as well. We'll have a few notes about signing procedure at the end, so you can look forward for that particularly exciting announcement. But the only thing I will put in your brain right now is that we will ask you all to remain in place for just a moment at the close of the event while we safely transport Adriana to the signing table beside our cash list. Now, your host for this evening, who you'll be meeting in just a few moments, is Jason Ryle. Jason is a producer, programmer, and arts consultant. He's Anishinaabe and a member of Lake St. Martin First Nation. Jason was the executive director of Imagine Native from July 2010 to June 2020. He is currently producing several projects for film, television, and virtual reality, and serves as the international programmer of Indigenous cinema for TIFF. Now, our guest of honor this evening, Adriana Chartrand, is a mixed-race Native woman born and raised in Winnipeg. Her father is Red River Métis, Michif, born and raised in the Métis community of St. Laurent, and her mother is a mixed white settler from Manitoba. Adriana has 2 degrees in film studies and has previously worked in the social work field. She lives in Toronto, works in the film industry, but is here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Adriana Chartrand.
I know most of you, so it feels a little strange to thank you, but thank you so much. I'm going to start with a short reading. Won't be super long, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, so that's also part of why it's short. I'm going to start at the very beginning, and then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, so it's not continuous within the novel, but I'll just kind of set the scene. So, chapter 1. The drive home takes Dawn 3 days. West then north, down undulating highways, jockeying for space with the massive semis that burn past, rattling her small car and making her white-knuckle the wheel and swear under her breath. The landscape flattens by increments as she speeds along. Her calf cramps terribly because she doesn't trust cruise control, because she doesn't drink enough water. She calls and books roadside motels for the night while she eats what passes for lunch at fluorescent lit gas stations. The highway at night is a strange in-between space, a place that is no place. She's contained and suspended in her car, a pinprick of existence traveling outside of time. The numbing sameness of the road allows her to make an uneasy peace with her thoughts that she needs right now. Still, her body is betraying her, cramping and hurting. Her stomach doing bigger flips the closer she gets. There's a train at the crossing, so she throws the car in park and chews on her bottom lip. She's 20 minutes out from the city. The train rolls by slowly, its cars brown, 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 and every color, big looping graffiti covering every third or fourth car. They blur together and she looks at the empty open fields around her and realizes her lip is bleeding. The train's last car rolls past. She drums her fingers on the steering wheel. The asphalt in the distance gleams with what looks like glistening water that constantly recedes as she approaches. She ignores her churning stomach and follows the vanishing water. Everything looks the fucking same, Dawn thinks, as she pulls onto the loose gravel driveway of her childhood home. It's a bungalow with a gray slate roof. The A-frame roof hangs low, reaching for the grass on either side of the house, shrouding the windows and front door like a creature peering out from the underbrush. Dawn cuts the engine and sits behind the wheel, one leg jiggling restlessly up and down. The car is already heating up, and beads of sweat roll from her hairline down her back, following a preordained route to the crack of her ass. It's August, a month of long, oppressive days on the prairies. The sky an imposing dome, clouds scudding low over the fields. Dawn shifts uncomfortably. August, with everything beginning to teeter in its full ripeness toward decay, always turns her thoughts towards autumn, then toward the coming winter. In her father's driveway, she gets out of the car, dragging her overstuffed bag of belongings behind her. The bag is bulging and heavy, awkward to carry, but still holds a pretty pitiful collection. Everything she owns at 29 years old, stuffed into a pink and black Reebok gym bag that scratches her arm with its rough Velcro strap. It's safe to say that her life in Toronto didn't turn out as planned, but she hadn't planned, had she? She doesn't want to think about that right now. She doesn't need to think, she just needs to do. Get through this rough patch and then make a plan, a real one. Don't think, she thinks, and heads for the front door. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. Although it's barely 10 p.m., the house is quiet and dark. Martin goes to bed early. He's finally moved out of the dank basement and back into the main bedroom. The air outside is starting to turn toward the harsh bite of winter, the crispness of fall, giving way to pure cold, especially at night. Dawn's in her room watching TV on her small laptop. On the drive back from Toronto, she'd worried that Francis would call the police on her. She spent hours alternating between peering anxiously in the rearview mirror, half believing she'd see a cadre of police cars, sirens blaring, suddenly appearing in the distance, and reassuring herself that even if he had called the cops, they wouldn't mount a nationwide search for her. She wants to laugh now at the memory, but she thinks the laugh would maybe be the half-crazed kind, verging on tears. She has an unread Facebook message from Casey that she's assiduously avoided looking at for months. The only message has gotten from anyone from her life there. It begins, "Holy shit, man, what?" And that's all Dawn can see without clicking the message and showing she's read it. She knows she'll never read it if she doesn't delete it. She lies sideways in bed and doesn't bother to adjust the screen, watches the actors move at an angle, heads tilted like dogs listening for a whistle. And she hears a noise in the living room. The sound is lost as soon as she hears it. She swings up and out of bed and crosses the room in a few strides. As she steps into the dark hall that leads to the bathroom, she hears someone clear their throat from the direction of the living room. She moves slowly down the hall and 3 figures come into view, backlit by the bright moonlight coming from the front window. Even in silhouette, she knows immediately that one is Cody and one is Tyler. The third is a short, muscular man she doesn't recognize. The short man's arms are crossed and agitation steams off him in waves. He's gesturing at the window. No, he's gesturing downwards toward their feet. In the deeply shadowed dark, the floor there has a different quality. Dawn conceals herself just inside the open bathroom door, peering around the frame. As she stares at the spot on the floor, she registers a faint hissing, like a kettle beginning to build up steam. The short man is gesturing emphatically at the floor. Tyler and Cody are standing on either side of him, their arms crossed and chins tucked in, nodding and looking placidly at the place his hands indicate. Oh Christ. She jerks her head back, realizes she's gripping the wooden door frame painfully with her fingers. The floor moved. She's certain she saw a ripple of movement. Her stomach is icy cold and turbulent. The kettle is shrieking now, boiling water hitting flesh. There's a chemical scent in the air like electricity, maybe a hint of salt, something Dawn can't name. The stranger seems to be imploring Tyler and Cody, who are unmoved, pleading with them. As the man turns to Cody, her brother meets his eye, shrugs, and kneels down. He crouches at the edge of what Dawn can now see is a hole of deepest black. It appears to hover over the floor. The hole is not in the floor. It's in the air, the atmosphere just above it. Seeing this, Dawn has the sensation of a break occurring somewhere inside of her, a seismic break at the core of herself. She cannot take in what she's seeing because it holds only one meaning: impossible.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Adriana. I've got some questions for you.
Great. Can't wait to answer them.
Adriana and I have known each other for quite some time, so this is both exciting and a little surreal because it was a bit of a surprise to me that you'd written a book. So I definitely have some questions in terms of when it all went down.
Sure.
But I'm always interested in hearing the origin story of these things. I mean, I know, the word amongst our group of friends is Adriana wrote a book during the pandemic. So let's start there by unpacking that. When did you start?
Yeah, so that's basically the truth. I'd always kind of written, but really like sketchily, like I just started a short story and then I wouldn't end it, and I'd kind of have half an idea and write part of it, and then that would be it. And then during the lockdown, so I think it was probably April 2020, like a month into the serious lockdowns, because I lived in Toronto, which was like locked down. Like I was in a one-room apartment by myself and I like could not go out. So I was like, okay, you gotta do something to fill the time and keep yourself sane. So I started writing, and for some reason it just kind of clicked. Like things kept coming, I guess, and it was like started with one scene, and then I would build out around that scene, and then I just kind of kept writing until I realized I was writing a book.
So was this book one of those initial nuggets that you had? Like where did the spark of inspiration come from for the story?
I don't really know. I mean, part of it's my life, obviously, but it's not autobiographical. It is fiction. And I wish I could remember which scene I wrote first, but I can't. I have a terrible memory. But it just started flowing, and I think it was really Dawn, that the main character, that I kind of connected with first, in the sense of realizing I could kind of keep going with this. Does that make sense?
It does. What was it about Dawn specifically? I mean, obviously there's, I think, elements of your life that are informing her, but clearly as a fictional character, what drew you to her?
I think just the ability to put a lot of the things I wanted to say into this character, and then also to put her in a situation I've never personally been in. Her brother's committed a violent crime in the book. He's been in prison for a while and then gets released. And I just thought she seemed like the perfect character to funnel sort of these thoughts and themes and ideas through and explore them through.
And that process of writing, I mean, it's always really interesting to me because, I mean, I think, as creative people, often ideas will percolate to the surface. But really, I mean, the challenge and the work is working that through and creating something substantive from it. So at what point did you realize this could work as a novel?
I think when I had like a little bit of a story going, I'll write a scene first, because that's how I think. Like I'll picture a scene with some people in it, whatever's happening, and then I'll write that, and then I'll kind of expand over there. So what could happen after this scene? What happens next? Or what could happen before this scene? So it's really not a linear process. But I think once I kind of created a bit of the story and I kept having those ideas that this scene could come before that or this could come after it, I realized maybe a few months in that I was probably writing a book.
Great thing. And you always envisioned this initially as a novel, not as a screenplay, not as a series, anything along those lines?
Yeah, always a novel. I obviously work in film, and I do a lot of script notes, script editing sort of thing, but I also read like crazy. I'm constantly reading. So I think it's always been in my mind to write novels versus screenplays.
So it's always been a lifelong goal. You've always believed you had a book in you.
I hoped.
Well, that part came true.
Yes,
so take that box in there. And in terms of again, going back to that process of creating and writing, it's a spoiler-free zone here, so we're really going to dive into the origin story a fair bit.
like, how long did it take you? Like, I know the pandemic was a long time in Toronto. You know, was that isolation of the pandemic? I mean, how did that inform your writing process? Not just in terms of giving you some quiet time alone, but actually sort of, you know, maybe highlighted that hallucinogenic claustrophobia that John mentioned in the intro.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it was obviously a new experience for all of us being in that type of lockdown. So I think feeling that isolation definitely, you know, it makes it easier to describe it when you're feeling it as you're kind of writing. So I think it definitely did. But I write like, it takes a while because I write and then I edit what I write. So I'll write in like kind of a spurt, like I'll just put things down. I call it like the creative part of the writing. I'm like, okay, I'm creating the scenes here, I'm getting it out. And then usually the next day I'll go back to it and edit it to make sure it actually makes sense, or it's any good, or I spelled things right, that kind of thing. So everything I kind of go over at least twice myself before that's part of it.
And start to finish, when did you sort of realize you had a first draft?
I think it was, well, so I submitted it to House of Anansi, the publisher, at they do an open call twice a year. So I submitted it in February. So I found out they were going to do an open call in like maybe December. And I had, yeah. And I had like almost a manuscript. It was different. Like it was in, I would say, like a rough draft form, but I was like pretty close to having it. So then I set that goal for myself. So I was like, finish it, get a manuscript, submit it. So I did that and we bought it. And then from there, it was about a year, I think, of working with the editor.
Well, I mean, just as easy as that, isn't it? Just write a book and get it published. But I mean, that's great. But I mean, clearly there was something much more like to it. I mean, like the process of working with us and Nancy, what was it when you got that news? They were interested in the book. What was that conversation like? I mean, I'm sure there's others here who have, you know, maybe as for an inspirational.
Yeah, I mean, it was super exciting. They write a letter kind of like almost like pitching themselves to you because they want to buy it, right? So they write like a lot of nice things about the manuscript and why they want to publish it and things like that. So it was really like surreal, I think, to get it. So I've been like I said, I read all the time. I read House of Anansi books a lot, so I've known who they are for years and love a lot of the Canadian books that they publish. So it was really like, yeah, very bizarre and strange to get the letter. And then to start the process was really cool because I'm usually on the other side of giving notes. I give them for film script and I love giving notes, but I really was excited to get them because I love them and I think you need to get notes if you're creative. So it was really, really, just really fun to have someone else like dig into my work and ask me questions and get my thoughts percolating about should that happen, could I go deeper there and that kind of thing. So it was, I really love that part of the process.
And that you know, that whole process with working with the editor, how much did the story change? Or like what was, you know, substantially changed during that process?
The story itself didn't substantially change, but the structure of it did. Like I'd written it a little bit looser, I guess I would say, than like a typical structure. Like I didn't even have it really divided into chapters. So dividing it into chapters and really getting the structure down and added, like I did add some things as well, but I don't think anything fundamentally changed in terms of the story elements.
Right. And let's talk a bit about Dawn and her experience, because she, I mean, this isn't a spoiler, but she has her life in Toronto. She's from an unnamed city in the prairies that may not rhyme with Winnipeg. But I'm curious as to why, you know, we know she's in Toronto. You never name Winnipeg specifically, and it's a fictional city. Can you, explore that with us a bit more?
Yeah, I did that on purpose, obviously. I think it's pretty obviously Winnipeg. Like it is fictionalized in a lot of ways, but there's other parts of it that I think Winnipeggers will recognize as Winnipeg. But the reason I really did that was because I didn't want it to seem like I was singling out these kinds of issues for Winnipeg alone, because a lot of the issues that are talked about, violence and things like that, colonization, they happen all across Canada, but they especially happen in prairie cities, the way that I'm speaking about them in the book. And it's not unique to Winnipeg, and I didn't want it to feel like I was hating on Winnipeg or trying to say it's only Winnipeg, because I wanted it to be almost a broader conversation about the prairies in general. So yeah, I didn't try to disguise it that it's Winnipeg. Like I hope that people from Winnipeg recognize it, but I just didn't want to specifically name it for that reason.
Yeah, I love that. I think also to really enhance the sense of the character of Dawn being really adrift and a bit sort of lost in kind of a void.
Yeah, and I wanted to emphasize that as well. Some of the themes are around like identity, especially Native identity, and feeling misplaced when you live in a colonial society or not knowing how to live in that kind of society. And again, that's something that I think all Native people experience to a degree, and especially people in the prairie. So I wanted that to be able to be recognized by like a lot of different Native people, not just say Métis people from Winnipeg or whatever.
Right. I want to dive into that a little bit deeper, because I think too, one of the things that's so fantastic about the book is that all those issues, I mean, from my read anyway, were really embedded in the story. You don't necessarily make an overt reference specifically to a certain nation or First Nations, Inuit or Métis specifically. I'm thinking about the chapter that references clearly the NMIW.
Yes.
You don't mention specifically
Yes.
that they're Indigenous. Is that an example of what you meant?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. And that there's a piece in the book where Dawn's reflecting back on when a serial killer was caught in the city, and it's obviously based on there have been actual white men who are serial killers of Indigenous women in Winnipeg and in other places, and there is an epidemic of violence. So I felt I wanted to include it because I feel it's such an important piece of a lot of our lives, and it's a part of Indigenous reality. So I felt it needed to be part of the landscape of the story, but I didn't want it to be the focus of the story, because it's not the story I was telling or my story to tell. So I wanted to find a way to incorporate it where it was understood that this is part of the landscape of the city, but it's not the focus of the story.
And was there any push-pull either with you yourself in terms of your writing process, or with your editors in terms of enhancing any of those elements to make it sort of more overtly Indigenous, perhaps?
No, they really didn't, which I appreciated. Like my editors didn't really push for that in that sense. So yeah, no, not really.
Right. And for you, you had a really sort of set line. You really wanted to keep this fully embedded.
Yeah, I mean, I was nervous about it because I think it's always just nerve-wracking when you're writing about things that are real, and they're really real to people and people that you know and love and care about. So I was very conscious of how I wrote about it and not trying to sensationalize it. But I think I tried to be conscious of that through the whole novel. Like, it's about an act of violence, and there's different violence discussed in it, but I didn't want to sensationalize that violence or focus on it as like a sort of spectacle. So I tried to take that same approach to the other descriptions of those sorts of issues.
And was it always going to be a horror? Like as you were writing it in the room, it really unfolded as a horror, or did that kind of come at a later point?
It was always a horror, but when I started writing it, I guess I wrote the more like normal parts, stories, like not necessarily the like horror scenes or horror elements. So at first I was kind of like, is this weird? Like, am I shoving this in here to the story? Like, is this just like a gritty drama or whatever? And I'm trying to shove like horror into it. But then I kind of found a way, I think, to incorporate it and to write about it. So I always wanted it to be a horror, but I did have some sense of like, I don't know if this is really working at first when I started like really trying to write the horror scenes and incorporate like those more horror elements into it.
Were you always a horror fan?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Don't know if I knew that about you, actually.
My mom's laughing because I have some stories. Well, I watched a lot of horror movies at a young age, including Children of the Corn when I was about 8 or 9, and then my parents took me to the corn maze after the corn maze.
Good move on that.
I thought it would be funny, and I guess it kind of was. My sister's like horrified; she can't watch any horror movies, and then I went the other way, and I'm like so love them. But yeah, I watched a bunch of horror movies like way too young probably, but I still love them. Read horror books. One of my best friend's older brothers was like a teen when we were little kids, and he had those scary stories to tell in the dark with the really creepy black and white illustrations, and we would steal those from his room and like read them all the time and things like that. So I was always a fan.
I loved when I first read it, one of the earlier drafts, And again, wasn't expecting a horror necessarily, because you didn't tell me anything when I did a first pass on it.
I didn't?
No, which I loved. Or maybe I said, don't tell me anything, because I just want to comment it cold. But again, it kind of crept up on me, and I wasn't sure if it was just meant to be allegorical or metaphorical, but it really genuinely is rooted in the supernatural or in the horror genre.
Yeah.
I'm always curious about writers when they create these fics. Like, I mean, how much of that world is fleshed out in your mind? Again, spoiler free, but you know, I'm just curious as to, is there a bigger world that you already envisioned and have in mind?
No, not really. Like, when I write the horror elements, I really try to think of what would scare me. Like, what do I find creepy when I'm reading something or watching a movie? And then I try to figure out how to incorporate that. I try to avoid like a lot of the common tropes as well, and just think of ways that I would be scared if I was reading it. So I really worked that way. But in terms of a larger universe, I think I leave a lot of things open-ended on purpose, because I like people to draw their own conclusions, or you know, think of different ways that this world could be expressed, because that's part of the fun, I think. So I wouldn't say there's like a total whole world built out around it in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So the hole that you just read out in
Yes.
the floor, I mean, this is something clearly that has multiple meanings. I mean, not just something that terrifies you, but I think, you know, having read the book, you can ascribe certain meaning to it along some of the lines of themes that we've spoken about already. Again, how deliberate was that? Or did you kind of connect the dots afterwards in the editing process?
Most of it is deliberate. Like, some things definitely were connected in the editing process or strengthened in the editing process. Like, a lot of it was my editor being like, that's too subtle. And I was like, is it? I'm like really alert to things being like cheesy or, you know, like heavy-handed, that kind of thing. Almost maybe that I'm a little too vigilant on it. So in some spaces they were like, you can go like a little more on this. Like, I don't know if that's going to come across. So I think there was definitely my intentions were there, but sometimes they hadn't always come through, and then I had to sort of tease those out some more during the editing process.
Can we talk about the creepy jackrabbit?
Sure.
All right, tell us about the creepy jackrabbit who's appearing on the cover.
Yeah, so there's a creepy jackrabbit in the story, and the origin of it is actually a dream I had like many years ago when I was like a teenager. And it was just like this really random, strange dream where I looked down like a kind of a dark alley, like in, I don't know, Winnipeg or somewhere. And there was just like a really massive rabbit in the alley, like big, like wildcat-sized jackrabbit in the shadows. And it just kind of looked at me, and it didn't do anything. But this dream had this crazy like atmosphere in it, and just this sense of like foreboding and ominousness. And I woke up and I was like, holy fuck, what was that rabbit? And I was like freaked out by it, because I also didn't get it. So I was like, it's a rabbit, why would I be scared of a rabbit? So I drew this like really shitty sketch of it, because I'm not an artist. And it's still in my parents' fridge, funnily enough. But that was where it came from. And then obviously, you know, it changed, and I added elements and stuff to how it works within the story. But that was the genesis of it, just having this really weird dream and being like, that's weird that you can be afraid of a giant rabbit. And then I was like, how could I write this so people are actually afraid of a giant rabbit?
Well, you succeeded on that front, definitely. It's very creepy. But when did it actually become tethered to this particular book? Like, was it, you know, did the dream come back to you as you were writing?
Yeah, I don't really remember when it actually became tethered to the book. Like, I think I just kind of had this scene in my mind of like Dawn seeing this rabbit the same way, like, you know, the same sort of scene from my dream, but Dawn is the character seeing it and feeling those feelings. And I thought, like, how can I incorporate this into the story? Like, how would it actually make sense? So yeah, it kind of just came from that.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a bit about the characters in the book. And again, walking this fine line of using real life inspirations versus fictional characters. And Dawn, dive a bit deeper into the character of Dawn, obviously informed somewhat by you, but where did you pull that other inspiration? How does she differ from you? Where does she intersect with you?
I think a lot of her feelings, a lot of things she sort of wrestles with emotionally and internally are from me, but they're also from my friends, people I know, my family, and things like that. So I think it's really an amalgamation of a lot of different experiences, but kind of maybe filtered through my own, if that makes sense. But she is fictionalized. You know, some of the stuff she goes through is stuff that I've done, but with a twist, you know, like fiction.
I feel there's layers to the twist part of it, but maybe we can go. But I'm curious, any of those issues that you were grappling with? I mean, obviously, creative expression, writing something, creating something can exercise some of those things,
Yes.
or maybe answer some of those questions. What were some of the things maybe that were answered for you?
Yeah, I think part of it was just like wanting to create something that was kind of like a visceral expression of what it can sometimes feel like when you're like living as a Native person in these societies with all these issues and all the crap of colonization and, you know, depression, trying to deal with a big bad thing that's happened to your family. I think just working through those kinds of feelings through Dawn, and especially through the horror lens, like being able to throw her into these situations where something supernatural is happening. There's something cathartic about it to me, and for some reason, I think there's something that really drives it home for people in a way with horror. You know, you can talk about social horrors and through horror in a way that sometimes really helps illuminate them and really gets that like that visceral feeling, you know, of horror, because colonization is horrifying, and you know what we still live with is really horrifying. There's a lot of joy and happiness and laughter and light too, but there are horrifying things. So I wanted to try to capture that like very visceral feeling of feeling like, you know, you live in this crazy society.
And Dawn also is mixed race. Her mother was Indigenous, but has since passed. She passed when she was younger. But you really used the character of Violet, Dawn's mother, in an interesting way. Tell us about her.
Yeah, so Violet has died when Dawn was younger, and she's an adult in the book, but she has sort of visitations from Violet's ghost. That's on the back, so it's not a spoiler. But yeah, I used Violet to sort of talk about a lot of maybe those intergenerational issues, like what my parents' generation, my father's generation, or what some of those people have gone through, have lived through, you know, looking at those through Violet, but also looking at Dawn's connection to her nativeness, like because Violet's dead, you know, she sort of has to come to find her own connection. So I think part of that is in there as well. Right,
yeah, there's a very real disconnection from her culture and her community because of Violet's absence. Yeah. She never had that growing up.
Yeah.
And Tyler, who again on the back is, you know, maybe the leader of a supernatural cult. Tell us about him.
Yeah, Tyler was fun to write, even though he's not a good guy. Like he's a bad guy. But it was interesting to write him because I poured a lot. Like I tried to have nuance in this character as well, because I don't like a villain to be just like entirely a villain. But Tyler for me is really just sort of that like voracious appetite of colonization, of white supremacy, of those ideologies, sort of the manifestation of that, of you know, feeling empowered to act however you want. I think we all know a lot of people like that. I think we all know society tends to like empower men like that as well. So obviously it's a lot more extreme in the novel of, you know, sort of the actions Tyler's doing, but that was pretty much the genesis of it, was just like, you know, kind of like a male foot soldier, white supremacy kind of guy.
Well said. Some of the creepiest characters for me actually were the neighbors, like Crystal and Jeff.
Oh yeah, Jake. Yeah, I was like, it's Jeff.
I'm looking at Jeff. Right? Not you, Jeff. Jake.
It's not you, Jeff.
Anyway, tell us about them. I'm always curious about sort of how you flesh out these characters, where they came from, and sort of the function they served, particularly with Tyler.
Yeah, I mean, they're not based on any one person. I would say like even less so than Dawn. But they're really like an amalgamation of kind of a lot of different people and just kind of representing a certain way of life, I guess. Some people are living in like prairie cities. Like I wanted to capture that. And I wanted, you know, Dawn's relationship with Crystal is sort of adversarial, but she also kind of feels bad for her. And I wanted to kind of capture that as well. And Crystal and Jake are kind of like, you know, complicit, I'll say, without saying more, but it's complicated, I think, more so for Crystal, which I also wanted to kind of work that in there as well.
Yeah, the awkwardness of their reunion, I think, is something that we can all relate to, certainly.
Yeah, and like, I mean, there's just pieces of that that are inspired by, you know, you move away for years and you come back and see somebody you haven't seen, and it's kind of awkward, but those are just the pieces, right? Like the real basis of them was to explore that sort of domestic relationship that can go wrong kind of through Jake and Crystal, and also to explore their complicitness in the larger thing.
One of the things too that was really pervasive for me throughout, both in terms of how you wrote Dawn and her experiences, but all the characters, the landscape, the tone, was this pervasive sense of longing or being called to something, but always within a void, like never knew exactly what she wants to do with her life, or really understanding where that call is coming from. And that just like, that it inhabits the book so fully in terms of that space. And again, no spoilers, but I'm not really sure that's ever really answered and addressed in the end. So in terms of the themes that you're talking about and wanting to address, where does that leave us at the end of the novel?
I tried not to like wrap everything up neatly, because life doesn't get wrapped up neatly, and you know, we often don't get answers that we want, and that can be part of life, as frustrating as that is. And also because like we keep on living, so I imagine, you know, Dawn's life goes on after this book and things continue to happen to her, so I wanted to sort of nod to that. But I think in terms of that longing, I mean, I'm happy to hear you say that, but I think that is probably kind of how I feel like, a lot of the time, especially on the prairies. Like even just like my image of like the prairies themselves, those open fields, it's always felt like beautiful, but kind of empty. Like it is empty, you know, it's a field, but so there's that beauty and that empty, that sort of emptiness, that sort of push and pull all the time here. And I think that's reflected in a lot of different things, a lot of different dynamics. So yeah, I mean, I think that probably is just largely from me and my life and my feelings.
I mean, it's super relatable. I mean, as someone who's also from Winnipeg,
Yes,
but lives in Toronto, I mean, there's always complicated layers of sort of connections to home or our home communities, even if they're not necessarily the city. I mean, those layers really exist. And I think you did that so fantastically within the script. I work in film too, so that's always my reference point within the novel, which is great. So I think you've answered this already, but do you feel like there's a sequel to this story? Is this sort of grounds or characters that you want to tread again?
I think I'd be open to it, but I'm not like necessarily planning that. Like I definitely didn't write it thinking like this is going to be something of a sequel or like a trilogy type thing or anything like that. But yeah, I think the characters definitely live on, and I could probably think of some other things that they're going to do.
And I mean, if not these characters, I mean, you're going to write a second book, I imagine.
I hope so.
But not during a pandemic, we hope.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I mean, I think coming down to what do you hope an audience takes away from this? I mean, you're an expert in film, but you've created something of your own this time. I mean, this wonderful book. What do you hope an audience takes away from this?
I hope they take away just something lasting, which I think is usually the hope when you create something, you know, whether that's an image or a scene or a new perspective or even just a sentence that really resonated with them, just something that really hits them somewhere deep inside and can stay with them in whatever way that is.
I think that's really beautiful. Are there any questions at this point? I mean, we can carry on talking, of course, but if anyone has any specific questions that they'd like to say, please raise your hand and John will come with a microphone. Also online, please just type in your questions.
Oh my God, this is a selfish question. It's probably no one else is gonna care about this question. But as you know, I also read scripts for work. And I'm curious about you're in this position where you're giving people creative feedback and negotiating creative feedback with them. And then you find yourself on the receiving end of it. which you talked a little bit about, but now I want to know, did that change your work when you go back to work and are giving creative feedback again? Has it adjusted or recalibrated you in any way?
Good question.
I feel like I'd be a better person if I said yes, but I think the answer is no. I mean, I'm pretty straightforward. I'm just kind of like a blunt person. But that being said, I'm not mean when I give creative feedback, but like I'm honest. And I think that that's actually really valuable for a creator. I hope it's valuable for the creators I work with. It was really valuable for me to have that honesty, and that's what I'm looking for. Like I don't need all the like, oh, it's the best thing I've ever read, you know, whatever. That's like, sometimes there's a lot of that sort of fluff floating around in our creative industry. So I was really glad to just have someone like, who knows what they're doing, like cut through all that and be like, is this what you meant? Does this work here? You know, that enabled me to think about it from the point of view of the craft of it, like really, really well. And, you know, for me, that kind of cuts out all the personal stuff. Like you're not thinking like, oh, they don't like me. Because you're just like, you're really concentrating on the story. You're like, it's about the story. So for me, it just kind of reinforced how important notes are, I think, in the creative process for everyone.
Right. And oftentimes it feels like, you know, writers can sometimes be divided into two very general camps. I mean, those who want to hear how fantastic their story is, and others who want to hear how they can make their story better. And I know that's your approach in terms of the notes that you give. So that's a nice bit of insight.
I'm nice too. Okay?
Oh yes,
like I give people
100%.
compliments. Eva can
Fair
attest.
comments. Next question.
Oh my God,
I was just wondering if you think that the novel could be adapted for the screen. Is that part of your vision?
For legal reasons, because I'm employed with Right to Live in Canada, not right now. Like, no, I couldn't develop it while I work where I work, but I think at some point I would be interested in it probably, and I think it could translate to the screen. Like, because I work in film, I think in like more cinematic scenes sometimes, so I hope that translates in the writing.
In that future parallel world, I mean, was this something that you thought about in the writing of it? Like you're like, oh my God, this will make a great series, movie.
I mean, I thought about it in the sense that I work in the industry and I know a lot of filmmakers and producers, and I was like, people are gonna ask about it. And like, so I did think about it, but not necessarily, like I wasn't writing it to become a movie, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Absolutely. There's another question up front.
Also, Adriana, I already told you I'm gonna option it, so back off, Eva. I took a screenshot when I sent that message to you. No, I'm curious because, like Jason said, I almost called you Justin. As Justin said off the top. It was surprising to me too to find out that you'd written a book. No disrespect. But I'm wondering, when you're writing this in the pandemic, are you telling people in your life about it, or did you just say, huzzah, I sold a book?
It was kind of more like that.
The latter.
Yeah, I think I did tell people about it at some point, obviously, but I'm not sure at what point that was. Like, yeah, probably fairly far into the process.
It's like already sold.
She mentioned it, but it was like, oh, that's great. You know, but then it's like, boom, a book. It did, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't like talking about stuff all the time while I'm doing it, because I'm kind of like, I could jinx it. And it's also just like, no one wants to hear about you writing a book. They want to hear that you wrote it, you know, like, so that's more fun.
Question there.
Hello, my name is Shayla Elizabeth, and I'm sorry I missed the beginning, but I'm really glad to hear the back and forth right now. So I think my question was answered. You were like, I didn't write the book as a potential for a screenplay. And the reason I'm asking that is that I am a writer. I have been published. I've been on stage as a declaimer of my poetry. And I know there's two sort of different formats. And to me, is that sort of like two different ways of thinking? Or is it really easy to adapt from a book to there's several movies at the TIFF. I saw that on CBC. So I'm just sort of like technical point of view, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on like the source material or the book. Some things lend themselves more easily to an on-screen adaptation, but I really do believe that sort of like the fundamentals of like engaging storytelling are the same regardless of the medium you're using. So it's more about just translating those fundamentals, using the techniques of your medium, using language of your medium, whether that's cinema or writing. So yeah, I mean, I think some things, you know, with a really experimental form, say, might be very hard to see how that could become a film or a linear movie or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I see that storytelling kind of has the same basis throughout the mediums, but what's great is that the mediums can play with and change those base elements, you know, in such different ways.
So another question. Adriana, in terms of like, you know, obviously we work in film and we have very specific production protocols when it comes to the use of any Indigenous content within any screen-based work. Something similar exists in the literary world, but also like when you're talking about spirits or other beings or beings of power, I mean, was there an element of concern on the cultural front for you? And was there any kind of protections that you took?
Well, I did a sensitivity read. Jason did a sensitivity read on it, mostly for the violence and cultural elements and stuff, and make sure that there wasn't, you know, harm being done there. In terms of the spiritual elements, I didn't, because they're not actually based on like a specific myth or legend from a specific nation. Like I know some of the stories, as we all do, and like I would say it's like from that same realm, but fictionalized. So if I had been using like, say, a Wendigo or something that is very specifically from a nation or lots of different nations, lore or myths or stories, I definitely would have been doing like the research and working in that way. So I avoided taking like a direct spiritual story from a particular nation.
Yeah, I'd still be terrified of that jackrabbit coming back. But tell us about how you portray Toronto in the book as well. I mean, it's not a perfect place, but in comparison to the unnamed prairie city, I mean, it definitely is a bit of a haven or oasis for Dawn.
Yeah, I think in some ways it is. And I do love Toronto, so don't get me wrong. But I think she also kind of learns that some of that is like a facade, you know, like when she goes to the warehouse art party, when she meets her boss at the not-for-profit. So I just wanted to comment on, you know, some of the ways that, you know, a big city can be great and it can be freeing and it can provide you like new landscape to be new, but you're also still the same person and all your experiences are still filtered through you no matter where you are. So I also kind of wanted to show that, and just to show, you know, your life's not going to change and become totally perfect because you moved to the big city, and you know, there's people there doing kind of like whack stuff too.
Yeah. Always get a bit more. I mean, this isn't just the Winnipeg launch of this book. This is actually the global launch. This is the first time you're bringing this book to audiences, which is great. What surprised you the most about all of this? I mean, it just seemed like you had this incredible path to being published and a great experience with this. But I mean, has it moved quickly? Is there something else that you've really found happily surprising?
Yes, it has moved quickly. So my original contract with the publisher was for it to come out in winter of 2024. And then I guess last November, terrible dates, but yeah, it would have been last November. They were like, hey, do you think you can finish the edits fast? And can we move it up to publish in fall of 2023? Which I've been told is like a better publishing season. I don't really know what that means, but I was like, sure. So I madly finished the edits in like 3 weeks, like the last round of it, not the whole thing, in last November, so that we could start finalizing it. And then it goes through like a ton of like copy editing and proofreading and stuff, which was really cool to have that many eyes on it too. So yeah, I think moving it up was surprising. Just really everything's been surprising because I don't know the publishing world. So anytime something happens, I'm like, oh, cool.
Yeah, sounds great. Are there any questions online, John?
They are watching, but they are not inquisitive.
Okay.
Are there any further questions here from the audience? Over here.
So congratulations on your global launch.
Yeah.
How does it feel for you? Are you overwhelmed? Are you excited? Are you disappointed? Where are you at?
I'm excited and a bit sweaty and nervous, but mostly excited. Yeah, it does feel overwhelming at times, I think, just because it is like so new to me, and it seems like lots of good things have been happening around it. So a little bit of overwhelm, but mostly excitement.
Yeah, there's been some great early metrics, which we don't have to go into details about, but there seems to be a growing buzz around the book. I mean, clearly the launch here at McNally Robinson, so fantastic, a bookstore we've both loved for so long. And tell us a bit more about when it, I mean, we can get the initial copies here, but it's launching when, formally?
So it's officially published on Halloween this year, October 31st. Yes. But you can buy copies here tonight, and I can sign them for you if you would like. And you can also pre-order it from McNally or other sources.
And is there anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't address specifically?
Yeah, I wanted to thank McNally because, like you said, we both love the store. The store is really, really special to me. I've been coming here to buy books since I was a little kid, and it's one of my comfort places. And I can't imagine anything better than just wandering the aisles here with nothing else to do and spending hours picking out a bunch of great new books to read. So it's really like a surreal dream to be here launching my debut novel. So it feels like a really wonderful full circle moment for me.
And a thrill for me. Thank you for asking me to take part in this. And thank you, McNally Robinson. Thank you all of us for joining here tonight and online. Adriana, thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you both so very much. And thank you again to House of Anansi for allowing us to, put out this book a little bit earlier so that you can all have it in hand. We will move along to the signing portion of this evening right now. So again, we'll ask you all just to remain in place for one moment. We'll transport Adrienne to the signing table and then you may join us. We do have copies at the table. We have copies at the cash desk. Please feel free to get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Just please do pay for the book before you physically leave. I'll extend the gratitude one more time. Thank you again to all of you for being here tonight, both physically and virtually. Again, to House of Anansi for publishing this book. It's an exceptional book, like just an exceptional book in general. And the fact that it is a debut novel is frankly shocking. So I hope you all purchase some copies, just enjoy it and just revel in the sweaty nervousness inherent to this book as well. So thank you so much to Jason
That's for
Ryle.
me.
And Adriana Chartrand. Have a good night, everyone.